A man stands waist-deep in the muddy current of the Jordan River. Water drips from a heavy coat of camel's hair. The real question of this moment isn't, why is Jesus being compared to a farm animal? It is this: what is the lamb actually supposed to do? The executioners take his blood, and he does not say a word. His silence is not the surrender of a helpless victim. It is the deliberate restraint of a willing substitute. If he speaks to defend himself, if he opens his mouth to prove his pristine innocence, the trial ends. The legions of angels intervene. The execution stops. The lamb goes free. And the crushing debt remains on the ledger of humanity forever. He stays quiet because the judgment falling on him is not an accident. He is absorbing the blow. He is holding his breath so that the world can finally exhale. This ancient, quiet obedience is pointing directly at the sickness of the modern human heart. Because while the lamb was absolutely silent, we are deafeningly loud. We spend the majority of our waking hours constructing a bulletproof narrative of our own competence. If you sit still long enough, you can feel the quiet terror pulsing in your jaw, the fear that someone will look behind the curtain and see the actual ledger of your thoughts and failures. To avoid that exposure, you bring your own daily offerings to the invisible altars of modern life. You sacrifice your sleep to the glow of a laptop screen at midnight. You curate your public image to project an unbroken record of success. We live in a culture exhausted by the effort of trying to cover our own flaws. We hustle to prove our worth. We manage our image. You swallow the dry-mouth panic of a performance review, desperately hoping your resume is good enough to survive the cut. You are trying to paint the wooden doorposts of your life with your own achievements, hoping the judgment of others will simply pass over you. But the covering is always too thin, and the anxiety never actually stops bleeding. You hit the target on Tuesday, but the insecurity returns to demand more on Wednesday. The altar of human approval is exactly like the bronze grate in Jerusalem. It requires a constant, unending stream of sacrifices. Because human perfection is an illusion that always eventually expires. The relentless pressure to prove your worth is not a modern psychological phenomenon. It is the ancient, desperate instinct of a people trying to manufacture their own bloodless Passover. When someone questions your motives, your instinct is immediately loud. You pull out receipts. You justify your actions. You build an ironclad defense to protect your fragile reputation. The human ego is an incredibly noisy thing when it feels threatened. But the Amnos was silent, because he was stepping into the courtroom to take the guilty verdict on purpose. We are a species exhausted by the sheer effort of trying to be our own substitute. We carry a quiet, heavy terror that if people saw the ledger of our actual thoughts and failures, we would be ruined. But the man in the river is offering a completely different mechanism for survival. He is offering to take the crushing, splintering wooden crate off of your spine so that you can finally stand up straight. If you are exhausted by the noise of your own internal defense attorney, the silence of this lamb is the greatest relief you could ever discover. He is offering the staggering peace of letting someone else absorb the blow. But to actually clear the ancient ledger, the substitute cannot just be announced at the river. The debt has to be physically paid, and the timing of that execution contains a detail that changes how you view the entire cross. The sun beats down on the white limestone of Jerusalem. It is the 14th day of the month of Nisan. The city is suffocating under the weight of 250,000 pilgrims. The air is thick with dust, the smell of wood smoke, and the relentless, deafening bleating of sheep. It is the day of preparation. Look at the timeline John meticulously records in his gospel. It is the 6th hour, high noon. A Roman governor sits on a stone pavement and hands down a death sentence, less than a mile away. A silver trumpet sounds across the Temple Mount. The Passover slaughter has officially begun. We are trying to be our own covering. Jesus is stepping into the water to diagnose a disease that humanity has carried since Eden. John forces you to watch two timelines running simultaneously in the heat of the day. A priest raises a sharp blade in the temple courtyard. A Roman soldier lifts a heavy iron hammer on a hill outside the city. A lamb is tied to the bronze rings of the altar. A man is pressed against the rough wood of a cross. Blood spills across the holy pavement. Blood drips into the dust of Golgotha. The timing is not a coincidence. It is an orchestration. Jesus' Rex is not just dying on the day of Passover. He is dying at the exact hour the Passover lambs are being killed. This is not a tragic political assassination. It is a scheduled transaction. The Romans think they are executing a peasant rebel. The religious leaders think they are silencing a dangerous heretic. But heaven is executing the exact blueprint drawn up on a dark night in Egypt 1,500 years earlier. And John includes one incredibly specific, physical detail that locks the entire narrative loop together. As Jesus hangs, suffocating on the wood, his lungs failing, the soldiers nearby soak a sponge in sour wine. To reach his face, John tells us they lift the sponge up to him on a stalk. He names the specific plant. It is hyssop. Read the text closely. A Roman spear could have reached him, and the title, John shouts across the river, changes how you read every single thing Jesus does from this moment forward. A standard wooden pole could have reached him, but it is hyssop. 15 centuries earlier, terrified slaves huddled in the pitch-black night of Goshen. They took a branch of hyssop. They dipped it in the blood of the Say. They struck the wooden frame of their door, so the judgment of an empire-ending God would pass over them. Now, under a violently darkened Judean sky, a branch of hyssop touches a blood-stained piece of wood again. The architecture of the Exodus is fully realized. The substitution is final. The true Amnos takes the crushing weight of the world's debt onto his own spine, and he exhales his final breath. The thick curtain in the temple tears from top to bottom. The endless, exhausting cycle of the daily altar is instantly obsolete. The fire is put out. The debt is paid. But the story of this lamb does not end on a hill in the dirt of Judea, because 60 years later, an old man stands on a prison island, looks through a tear in the sky, and sees something that shatters every human assumption about power. The cold wind of the Aegean Sea whips across the rocky coast of Patmos. John, now an old man living in exile under the crushing authority of the Roman Empire, is caught up in a vision of the throne room of the universe. He sees a scroll sealed with 7 heavy wax seals. The phrase is not a poetic compliment. It is a terrifying job description. But to feel the weight of what John is actually saying, holding the ultimate destiny and justice of human history, an angel shouts with a voice like thunder, asking who is worthy to break the seals. The answer is absolute silence. John begins to weep violently. The tears are hot on his weathered face. The silence of heaven is terrifying, because if no one can open the scroll, the cycle of human suffering and death will never end. Then, an elder steps forward. He tells the old man to stop crying. He announces that the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the ancient root of David, has triumphed. He has conquered, and he possesses the authority to tear the seals open. Human expectation immediately builds a specific mental image. When you hear conquering lion, you expect a roaring beast. You expect a display of raw, apex predator dominance, an overwhelming application of brutal force. In our minds, and in the minds of the first-century church suffering under Rome, the only way to defeat an empire of violence is with a greater, more terrifying violence. John turns toward the center of the throne, bracing himself to see the muscular, frightening strength of a warrior king. But what he actually sees shatters the entire human definition of authority. He does not see a lion. He sees a lamb standing. You cannot start at the river. You have to rewind 1,500 years. You have to step out of the daylight of first-century Judea, as though it had been slaughtered. The Greek text is intensely graphic. It describes a creature bearing the fatal, gaping mark of a butcher's knife across its neck, a wound that should mean absolute death. Yet it is impossibly standing upright on its feet. The ultimate weapon of heaven is not an apex predator. It is a willing casualty. The elder announced a lion, but the apocalyptic shock of Revelation 5 is that the victory of the lion was achieved through the slaughter of the lamb. The empires of the world conquer by shedding the blood of their enemies. The God of the Bible conquers by shedding his own blood for his enemies. The scarred amnos is not just a temporary phase Jesus went through before returning to a state of pristine, unblemished glory. The scars are his permanent identity. The Lamb is not the precursor to the throne. The Lamb is the only one worthy to sit on the throne. We look at the brutality of the cross and assume it was a moment of supreme weakness, a temporary defeat before the resurrection. But Revelation argues the exact opposite. The slaughtered substitute is the absolute pinnacle of divine power, and that eternal reality forces a devastating question upon the way you and I are trying to survive right now, and walk into a pitch-black night in Egypt, holding a branch of hyssop and a bowl of warm blood. A frightened family painted blood on a wooden doorframe in the dark, and the judgment passed over their house. A barefoot priest slashed a throat on a bronze grate in Jerusalem, and the debt was pushed back another day. A prophet pointed a dripping finger across the muddy Jordan, and the true substitute was finally named. An ancient scribe watched a quiet execution centuries before it happened and realized the silence was on purpose. A Roman soldier lifted a sponge of hyssop to a blood-stained cross, and the architecture of the Exodus was completed. A carpenter exhaled his final breath on a hill, and the endless, exhausting fire of the daily altar was put out forever. An old man looked through a tear in the sky on Patmos, and the slaughtered creature was standing in the center of the throne. Same blood, same covering, one story. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the silence. The sheer, deliberate quiet of Isaiah's prophecy. In a world where we spend every waking hour shouting our innocence, desperately trying to carry the heavy, splintering crate of our own reputation on our backs, he just steps into the courtroom and absorbs the blow. He does not fight the false accusation. He takes it. The book of Exodus records the birth of a nation, but it is forged in the shadow of an execution. If you are in a season where you are exhausted by the noise of your own defense, if you are tired of bringing daily sacrifices to the altar of human approval, terrified that your personal covering is finally going to expire when people see the real you, the man in the river is offering you a completely different way to survive. The Amnos does not ask you to prove your worth. He asks you to put down the crate. Your covering is not a performance you maintain. It is a substitute you accept. And may the God who has never once demanded you bleed for your own rescue meet you in your deep exhaustion and cover you completely. It is the final night of slavery in Egypt. The 10th plague is moving across the delta. The air smells of wet earth and the sweat of 1,000 unwashed bodies. People have walked for days out into this wasteland. A darkness so thick you can feel it on your skin has already blanketed the empire. And now, a final judgment is sweeping through the streets. The decree is absolute. It is indiscriminate. But God gives Moses a bizarre set of instructions for the Israelites. Every family must take an animal, a year-old male without defect. The Hebrew word used here in Exodus 12 is seh. It is a broad term, referring to a small creature from the flock, typically a young sheep or a goat. They are to slaughter it at twilight. They are to catch its blood in a basin. They are to take a branch of hyssop, dip it in the bowl, and smear the sticky, dark red liquid across the top and sides of the wooden door frames of their houses. Then, they are to go inside, roast the meat over an open fire, and eat it in a hurry, with their sandals tight on their feet and a walking stick in their hands. While they eat, death passes through the streets. You can imagine the wailing beginning to rise from the Egyptian homes as the firstborn fall, a slow, terrifying wave of human grief, echoing through the dark night air. But when the judgment reaches an Israelite home and sees the blood painted on the rough wood, it passes over. Tax collectors, soldiers, religious elites, desperate farmers looking for a revolution, or at least a word from heaven, he is plunging them into the cold water. This is the foundational logic of the biblical narrative. The difference between the house where someone died and to understand the weight of the Jordan River, you have to examine the architectural foundation of the ancient Jewish mind. In the 12th chapter of Exodus, the Israelites are slaves under the crushing weight of a foreign empire. A final, devastating judgment is about to sweep across the land of Egypt. The instruction God gives to Moses for this night is incredibly specific and deeply unsettling. Every family is to take a year-old male lamb without blemish. The Hebrew word used here is seh. It refers to a member of the flock, a sheep or a goat, specifically chosen out from the rest. They are told to keep it in the house for 4 days. They are to listen to it bleat, let their children play with it, and attach themselves to its presence. And then, at twilight, they are told to slaughter it. They must take a bundle of hyssop, dip it in a basin of warm blood, and strike the rough wood of the lintel and the 2 doorposts. You can smell the copper in the air. You can hear the sounds of weeping beginning to echo from the Egyptian homes down the street. In the ancient Near East, blood is not just a biological fluid. It is the literal, physical currency of life itself, one by one, pulling them back up, gasping for air. And then, he stops. He freezes. A single figure is walking down the riverbank toward the water. When the judgment passes through the dark streets of Goshen, the qualifier for a family's survival is not moral perfection. The qualifier is not how well the people inside have treated their neighbors, how much they have prayed, or how accurately they understand theology. The judgment does not bypass a house because the people inside are good. The judgment bypasses a house because something else has already died there. The blood on the doorpost is not a declaration of innocence. It is the proof of a substitute. This night establishes the primary mechanism of the entire biblical narrative. When the ultimate accounting comes, a human being cannot stand on the merit of their own record. They must stand under the covering of a life given on their behalf. The Seh, the lamb, becomes the ultimate symbol of a surrogate. It is a blank check signed in blood, paying a debt a slave could never afford. But that one night in Egypt was only the introduction to a rhythm that would soon dominate every single day of the nation's existence. Fast forward 500 years. The desert is gone. The wandering is over. The temple stands massive and white against the Jerusalem sky. The sun comes up over the Mount of Olives. A priest walks barefoot across the cold stone pavement. He leads a year-old lamb. The man in the river points a dripping finger at the stranger and shouts a single sentence over the noise of the crowd. He ties it to rings near the altar. He lifts a sharp blade. The throat is cut. The blood is caught in a gold bowl. The warm liquid is splashed against the heavy bronze grates. The smoke rises. 9 hours pass. The sun begins to set. Another priest walks across the stone. Another lamb is brought. The knife falls. The blood spills. The smoke rises. This is the Tamid, the continual sacrifice. It is the unbreakable rhythm commanded in Exodus 29. 2 lambs a day. Every single day. Every week. Every month. Every year. Rain falls. A lamb dies. Kings are crowned. A lamb dies. Empires rise and fall. A lamb dies. The math of this ritual is staggering. 2 lambs a day means over 700 lambs a year, over 1,000 years. That is nearly 1 million animals. The priest's white linen robes are permanently stained. The air around the Temple Mount is thick with the metallic smell of blood and the heavy smoke of burning fat. The bleeding echoing off the limestone walls never stops. The temple is not a quiet sanctuary of meditation. It is an industrial slaughterhouse of substitution. The psychological weight of this system is designed to teach the nation one relentless lesson. Life is incredibly fragile. Rebellion is lethal. Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. It is arguably the most famous introduction in human history, and human survival requires a constant, unending stream of surrogates. But the system reveals a terrifying problem. The blood covers the immediate failure, but it never cures the underlying sickness. You bring a sacrifice on Tuesday. You break the covenant on Wednesday. The altar demands more. The fire is commanded to never burn out, because human failure never stops. The covering always expires. The ledger is never fully cleared. for 15 centuries. This is the only reality that people know. Blood flows. The debt is delayed. The cycle repeats. Until the day a prophet stands waist-deep in the muddy water of the Jordan River, he points a dripping finger at a carpenter from Nazareth, and he uses a very specific Greek word that signals the end of the fire entirely. The ink on the parchment of John chapter 1 preserves a moment that redefines the entire biblical architecture. We find the text in verse 29. John the Baptist is standing surrounded by the dripping, exhausted masses of Judea. He sees the carpenter from Nazareth approaching through the crowd. He raises his voice over the noise of the rushing water and makes his declaration, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." The word translated as lamb is the Greek amnos. It is a remarkably rare word, appearing only 4 times in the entire New Testament. Most people read that phrase and assume it is just a poetic title. We put it on stained glass windows. We sing it in quiet hymns. When Jewish scholars translated the ancient Hebrew scriptures into Greek centuries earlier, they did not select this word lightly. They used amnos specifically to translate the say of the Passover in Egypt, and they used it to describe the daily bleating lambs of the temple altar. You do not use amnos for a sheep grazing quietly on a green hillside. You use amnos for a creature bleeding out on a bronze grate. If realizing that a single Greek word carries the weight of 1,000,000 temple sacrifices changes how you read the New Testament, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. The detail hiding in plain sight in this verse is the specific action attached to the animal. John says this amnos will take away the sin of the world. The verb chosen here is airo. It does not mean to politely ignore a flaw or to sweep a mistake under the rug. In the ancient world, airo was the vocabulary of a laborer. It was the word used for a dock worker squatting down beneath a massive, splintering wooden crate, hoisting the crushing weight onto his own spine, and physically carrying it away. For 1,000 years, the daily sacrifices could only temporarily cover failure. We assume John is calling Jesus gentle, pure, perhaps a nice metaphor for innocence and peacefulness. But to a first-century Jew standing barefoot, but the underlying weight remained. The blood flowed, but the debt of human rebellion stayed stubbornly on the ledger. And then there is the radical addition of 2 simple words, of God. Under the Old Covenant, the worshiper had to provide the animal. You had to go into your own flock, pull out your own wealth, and bring your own covering to the priest. The cost was entirely on your shoulders. But John flips the ancient economy of religion completely upside down. This substitute is not provided by the terrified sinner. It is provided by the judge. When John points across the river, he is not making a flattering observation about a teacher's peaceful disposition. He is naming an execution date. The title is not a metaphor for innocence. It is the final receipt for 1,000 years of accumulated debt. But John the Baptist was not the first prophet to see this specific amnos coming. 7 centuries before the water of the Jordan River ever touched Jesus' skin, another man watched this exact same lamb walk silently toward a slaughter. A prophet sits in a room in Jerusalem. He holds a reed pen. Black ink stains his fingers. He is looking centuries into the future, watching the trauma of a servant who will heal the world. And he presses the reed into the parchment to record the words of Isaiah 53, on the banks of the Jordan. A lamb is not a metaphor for gentleness. It is the violent cost of staying alive. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent. So he opened not his mouth. For 1,500 years, the Temple Mount was deafening. The bleating of panicked animals echoed endlessly off the white limestone walls. Sheep fought the thick ropes. Goats thrashed against the bronze rings. The air was constantly filled with the frantic noise of creatures trying to escape the blade. Death in the animal kingdom is loud. Survival is a primal, violent instinct. But Isaiah sees a lamb who walks forward without a sound. Think about the sensory horror of an ancient execution. The metallic clatter of iron chains hitting stone. The rhythmic snap of a leather whip tearing skin. The desperate, guttural screaming. When a man is dragged before a judge in the 1st century, he fights, he begs, he curses his accusers, he lists his alibis. You shout your innocence to anyone who will listen, because you are trying to avoid the wood and the nails. The silence of this lamb is the most disorienting detail in the entire prophecy. When the religious elite hurl their fabricated accusations in the middle of the night, he says nothing. When the Roman governor demands a defense, holding the power of life and death in his hands, he stares back with absolute quiet. The shearers take his dignity. The soldiers take his clothes.